What if I told you that one ancient translation changed the course of history, sparked debates that still rage today, and influenced how over 2 billion people see God? This isn't a dusty old manuscript we're talking about. This is the Septuagint, a translation so powerful that it built bridges and lit fires. This is more than a Bible story. It's a tale of faith, power, controversy, and cultural collision. So imagine this, a city of gleaming white marble, Alexandria, Egypt, in the 3rd century before Christ. The air is thick with the scent of papyrus and incense, and the royal library, the largest in the world, buzzes with scholars. A Greek-speaking king, Ptolemy II, wants every piece of human wisdom translated into Greek, including the Jewish scriptures. 70, maybe 72 Jewish scholars are summoned to translate the sacred Hebrew texts into Greek. The result? The Septuagint. At first it was a bridge, bringing Jewish wisdom to the Greek-speaking world. But that same bridge would one day divide two of the world's major religions. Why? Because translation isn't just about words, it's about meaning, context, power, and belief. Stick around, because we're diving deep into how this translation helped shape both Christianity and Judaism, caused deep divisions, and still stirs debate today. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to our channel, give this video a like, and comment below your thoughts or questions about the Septuagint. And don't forget to share this with someone who loves digging into faith and history. Now let's begin. The Septuagint wasn't created in a vacuum. By the time of its creation, many Jews lived outside of Israel, especially in places like Egypt, where Greek culture and language dominated. For these Jews, Hebrew was no longer their first language. To stay connected to their faith, they needed scripture in a language they understood, Greek. So the Jewish elders got to work. According to legend, they translated the Torah in 72 days, each working separately, but miraculously producing identical versions. Whether that actually happened or not, the story conveys one thing. People believed this translation was divinely guided. But as this Greek Bible spread, something interesting happened. It wasn't just Jews who read it. Greek-speaking pagans, philosophers, and eventually early Christians read it too. This accessibility turned the Septuagint into a theological lightning rod. Now, let's talk about the verse that changed everything, Isaiah 7:14. In the Hebrew Masoretic text it says, "A young woman, Alma, shall conceive." Pretty straightforward. But the Septuagint says, "A virgin, Parthenos, shall conceive." One word, huge difference. Why does this matter? Because when the Gospel of Matthew quotes Isaiah to prove the virgin birth of Jesus, it uses the Septuagint's version. To Christians, it confirmed Jesus was the Messiah. To Jews, it felt like the text was being misused. Was Alma really supposed to mean virgin? Or did the Greek translators stretch the meaning? And it doesn't stop there. Psalm 22:16 in Hebrew says, "Like a lion at my hands and feet." Strange, right? But the Septuagint says, "They pierced my hands and feet," which Christians interpret as a prophecy of the crucifixion. Are these prophetic truths or translation twists? Theologians, scholars, and faithful believers have debated this for centuries. It all comes down to the power of interpretation and how one word can build or break a theology. Here's where it gets even more controversial. The Septuagint included books that weren't in the traditional Hebrew canon: Tobit, Judith, Wisdom of Solomon, Sirach, Baruch, and 1 and 2 Maccabees, among others. Today, Catholics and Orthodox Christians include these in their Bibles and call them Deuterocanonical books. Protestants, they usually call them Apocrypha and leave them out. Why the difference? Around the 1st century CE, Jewish leaders began to formalize their canon, partly in response to early Christians using the Septuagint to point to Jesus. They chose to exclude these books, partly because they weren't originally written in Hebrew or were too recent. Then, centuries later, during the Protestant Reformation, Martin Luther and others decided to follow the Hebrew canon, not the Greek one. The Catholic Church, at the Council of Trent, doubled down and affirmed the Septuagint's full content. The result? Even today, Catholic and Protestant Bibles don't match. Now the question, why did Judaism reject the Septuagint? Originally, Jews embraced the Septuagint. But as Christianity grew and began using the Septuagint to prove Jesus' messianic identity, Jewish leaders grew wary. They saw the Septuagint as compromised, used against them. After the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE, Jewish communities needed unity. They leaned into the Hebrew texts, eventually forming the Masoretic text. The Septuagint, now seen as aligned with Christianity, was largely abandoned. This rejection wasn't just about accuracy, it was about preserving identity. When your sacred texts are being quoted to support a belief system that challenges your own, reclaiming your version becomes an act of survival. Early Christians, many of whom spoke Greek, naturally gravitated toward the Septuagint. The apostles quoted it often. The early church fathers taught from it. For centuries, it was the Old Testament of the Christian church. Even today, the Eastern Orthodox Church continues to use the Septuagint as its Old Testament. Catholicism values it highly, even though Latin eventually became its dominant language. And Protestantism? It looks more to the Hebrew canon, though many Protestants still study the Septuagint for historical context. In a way, the Septuagint is like a family heirloom, treasured differently depending on which branch of the family you ask. Let's talk about what the Dead Sea Scrolls revealed. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in the mid-20th century, scholars were stunned. Among the ancient Hebrew manuscripts were texts that closely matched the Septuagint's readings, not the Masoretic text. This discovery flipped the script. It suggested that the Septuagint wasn't a wild reinterpretation, but possibly based on Hebrew texts that are now lost. That means some of the Septuagint's controversial differences might actually reflect ancient traditions, not translator bias. So is the Septuagint more accurate in places? That question still divides scholars. But one thing's for sure. The Septuagint isn't a mistake. It's a witness to a rich, complex textual tradition, the Septuagint's influence on the New Testament writers. Let's talk about something incredible, how deeply the Septuagint shaped the New Testament itself. When the apostles and early Christians quoted scripture, they didn't typically go back to the original Hebrew. They used the Bible they had access to, the Greek Septuagint. In fact, over 300 of the Old Testament quotations found in the New Testament come directly from the Septuagint wording, not the Hebrew Masoretic text. Take Hebrews 10:5, for example. It quotes Psalm 40, but instead of saying "you have dug my ears," as the Hebrew text does, the Septuagint says, "A body you have prepared for me," a reading that Christians have long interpreted as referring to Christ's incarnation. That phrase is echoed directly in the book of Hebrews to make a theological point about Jesus. That's just one of many cases where Christian doctrine was shaped through a Septuagint lens, whether it's the virgin birth, the suffering servant, or the priesthood of Melchizedek. The implications. Christian theology isn't just built on the Hebrew Bible, it's built on how the Septuagint interpreted it. That's not a mistake. That's a part of the divine plan, as many would say, where even translation becomes a tool for revelation. So what can we learn from the Septuagint? First, language matters. A single word can shape theology, inspire devotion, or ignite controversy. Second, translation isn't just academic, it's deeply spiritual. Every translation is a bridge, but some bridges become battlefields. The Septuagint reminds us that faith is both ancient and alive. It shows how sacred texts evolve across cultures, languages, and centuries. And it asks us to approach Scripture with humility, curiosity, and a deep respect for its complexity. Whether you read the Septuagint, the Masoretic text, or both, you're engaging in a centuries-long journey of seeking God. Thanks for sticking with us through this fascinating exploration of one of the most important and controversial translations in history. If you learned something new today, or have questions about the Septuagint, drop a comment below. We love hearing from you. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot, and it helps spread the word about the beauty and complexity of our faith. Until next time, keep searching, keep asking, and keep growing. God bless.